I might go back and get some more ancient or medieval philosophers, though maybe not. But let's talk about Thomas Hobbes. All right. Was it 1588 to 1679? It's not going to surprise anyone, I hope, who's familiar with like the shape of Western political philosophy, that Hobbes gets into this series. You know, now whether he's more of a totalitarian or an absolutist, I guess the latter is probably a better designation. But I don't know, there's plenty of reasons to worry about his totalitarianism too. Absolutism is enough to refute somebody completely, I guess, in my opinion, of course. But it's totalizing as well. I mean, one thing to keep in mind as we sort of move through the centuries is that the totalizing technologies develop as the modern period goes on. Like, it's possible to have fantasies in the 20th century about, media effects, mind control, and shit like that you just can't have in the 17th century. All right, so, I mean, there's plenty of totalitarian techniques that have yet to be developed. One of our species' greatest tasks. Techniques of large-scale subordination, where that's very typical of us as a species, as it turns out. Well, okay, Thomas Hobbes. I mean, I'm not going to do like a total political philosophy introduction or try to get all his philosophy together. I will say a few things, though. He's one of the greatest philosophers who ever wrote in English, I think. Or, one of the greatest philosophers in the history of philosophy for many reasons, actually. He's brilliant in many dimensions. And one thing I like about him quite a bit, profoundly innovative figure. One thing I like about him quite a bit is feet on the ground, man. There's not any cosmic bullshit in Thomas Hobbes. He's a materialist, dude. He's an atheist, I guess he denied that, of course, because otherwise, like I say, you don't make it by the bonfire. But seems pretty obvious when you read the Leviathan. Now, Leviathan is a work it's a system of philosophy. I mean, it does all kinds of stuff. It's gigantic. Among other things, it's a work in political philosophy. And in that way, and in many other ways that are visible throughout the text, it reflects its context in the emerging religious and doctrinal and political struggles in England in the 17th century. He's a royalist in the Civil War. In exile in France. I mean, he and Locke are just parallel cases on opposite sides, Locke is older, and Hobbes is older, and both of them are exiled when their people are kind of are living abroad, when their faction is living abroad. They're in opposite factions, but with very similar philosophies, because Locke was so heavily influenced by Hobbes. Now, Hobbes is, and I think everyone acknowledges this basically, and this is one thing to really think about and worry about. Hobbes is the founding figure of classical liberalism. Despite the absolutist monarchism, right? Classical liberalism, as classically conceived, is Lockean, okay? But you don't get to Locke without Hobbes' social contract theory. And this is one of many great innovations of the Leviathan is an extremely clear and comprehensible and direct formulation of the social contract theory, which is an idea that bounces around. I mean, you see even hints of it in the Republic and elsewhere in Plato. Like, I've agreed to these laws one way or another, you know. You might see little edges of it in some medieval political tracts and stuff like this, but as a system of political philosophy, social contract theory, and a direct and elaborate argument for the legitimacy of state power, which is its primary purpose, social contract theory originates in Hobbes, and and classical liberalism too. Although he doesn't draw what we would think of as classical liberal. He's got some classical liberal presumptions or arguments as well in other areas. Like, he argues for human equality. He argues for extreme power hierarchy, but he argues for basic human equality in the sense that we're all the same sort of thing. I mean, his particular form of equality is that any of us could possibly kill any of the others. That each of us is so radically vulnerable to violence and deprivation that that we might as well be equal. And we're very similar creatures in the sense that we're all pursuing our own good at all times. That's what accounts for human action, is we're pursuing some good that we want to maximize. Now, all of that, man, like, that's game theory, or that's the theory of action. That's the kind of contractual reasoning and Homo economicus picture that infests Western speculation ever after. Okay? Like, this is, and his argument that we're rationally contracting in order to maximize our goods when we form a state or appoint a sovereign is, it's just that people are still doing this, all the game theoretic arguments in the 20th century in favor of state power, a la James Buchanan and stuff like this. There's almost nothing in there except some numbers, which are not necessary. That's not in Hobbes. So this is brilliant, man, in many, many ways. It's also wildly disturbing. I mean, I guess we could say the same about Plato's Republic. It's brilliant as a work of literature in some way. Is it? I don't know. Hobbes is a lot more compelling as an arguer, if you ask me. But almost anyone is. Okay. But I don't mean to just... Yeah, I'm going to freewheelingly insult great philosophers, I guess, in this series. Why not? I'm all retired. No one's coming for my job, you know what I mean? I'm not going to get a call from the dean tomorrow morning. All right, I'm not going to get sanctioned by the APA. for ragging on Hobbes? No, anyway. But, okay. So let's just, there's so much in Hobbes, and, so I'm just going to try to cut to the chase. Like I say, I'm trying not to just teach this as a lecture, or the first lecture on Leviathan or something like this, but more like just a demonstration of the absolutism amounting to something like totalitarianism as that you would think of in the 17th century. All right. Now, one thing is his definition of justice, which is actually one of the definitions that was experimented with in the Republic. One of the first definitions that Socrates disposes of. That justice is performance of covenant. Simply doing what you agreed to do. That's Hobbes' definition of justice. It's quick, all right. Boy, it doesn't really, again, like if you have any ordinary language thing, that doesn't really seem to correspond to the way we use the term often, although sometimes it does. So injustice means nothing but the non-performance of covenant, that is, not keeping your promises. And Socrates did dispose of that in the Republic. Like when somebody says, like, oh, like uh, I agreed to lend you my sword, but then you came over here and you wanted to grab it so you could kill Mikey or whatever. And I didn't want to lend you my sword then, even though I promised. I knew it wouldn't be just to give you my sword so Mikey dies. All right, so things like that. Okay, counter examples. It's a very counterexamplable because it's a very primitive theory, I guess, or simplistic theory. He's maybe not that interested in what justice is. Right. But one thing about it is justice is purely conventional. It's a matter of whatever we agree to, doing whatever we agree to. So actually, if I agreed to give you my sword, it is just to lend you my sword, even if you go commit a mass murder with it. I think that's Hobbes' position. And there is no God cosmically guaranteeing what justice is. There's no form of the just in Hobbes. He's an early, excellent empiricist in that way. He's not going to have wild cosmic forces fixing the nature of justice itself. He doesn't have the pure reason determining what justice is, supposedly, or whatever. And so the common sense feet on the ground approach is emphasized by his definition of justice, like just keeping your promises, right? But what he really wants from that is that justice is whatever the sovereign says. Whatever the sovereign says, because we've agreed to abide by the sovereign's will. Okay, so that's what he means when he says justice is the performance of covenant. Injustice is the non-performance of covenant. All right. Now, let's cut to the chase. I guess I'm looking at the theories of justice of each of these figures to some extent as examples of their one locus of their totalitarianism. So justice, as actually actively defined by Hobbes, is just obedience to the sovereign power. That's what he calls keeping covenant. Okay, so as you'll I hope you'll recall, maybe you didn't take my class or other people's classes, but Hobbes describes a state of nature, a pre-political state, a stateless state, and an anarchy state. And he says it's the war of all against all, the war of every man against every man. Nothing is right or wrong in that state because there are no agreements, okay, and there's no sovereign power. Nothing is right or wrong. Nothing is just or unjust. Everyone's just trying to take everyone's stuff all the time. This is also an aspect of like the later game theory things, justifications of state power, and you might say, like, even if you're Locke, you might go like, we're not just monsters always trying to commit violence and take each other's goods all day. We cooperate, we do other stuff. Like, human nature isn't just merely acquisitive and self-interested. And Hobbes has a nice rejoinder, but definitely not decisive. He says, like, really? Do you lock your doors when you go out? Here in London or Paris? Do you keep your valuables in a lockbox? Do you go armed when you go out? This is England in the 17th century. You, like, sort of upper class person or whatever, do you take security measures? And this is in the middle of civilization with plenty of police power and stuff like this. You think what I think, but you're just not saying it. That anyone that really could take your stuff with impunity would take your stuff with impunity, okay? You think what I think, only you're pretending. And this is something I like about Hobbes. Again, like this is the power of cynicism or something like this. Like, that's cute bullshit that you don't really believe, but you're saying, okay? All right, so we're living in this war of everyone against everyone. Everyone's taking everyone's stuff, killing them if they can. I don't really want to kill you per se, but I want your goods. And there's nothing wrong with killing you because we're in the state of nature, so there's no law. What's right or wrong is what is right and wrong are observance and non-observance of civil law. He says that. So civil disobedience is never legitimate, and that's a absolutist and a totalitarian move. Like, yes. So, what is right or wrong, just and unjust, is just a matter of what the law says. There can be no unjust laws by definition. Aquinas is much better on that, or almost anyway. Okay, is more plausible on that. But you can see how he gets there with this feet on the ground thing, like what can right or wrong mean? Well, they don't mean cosmic forms. They don't mean will of God. They mean, so what do they mean in a ordinary, real way? They mean what is according to and what is against the law. So in the terrible inconveniences of the state of nature, this is what we do. We contract to erect a sovereign power. This contract is between us and not between us and the person we're appointing sovereign, or the committee or whatever, that we're appointing sovereign. This is an important point, and maybe I'll come back to it in a sec. The sovereign is not himself a party to the agreement that makes him a sovereign. For very good reasons, a good argument in Hobbes, I guess, as these things go. There's lots of good arguments in Hobbes. So you're going to have to address them, you know what I mean, if you don't agree with the conclusions. There's not lots of good arguments in Plato. But there's lots of good arguments in Hobbes. He's very ingenious in this way. And these are extreme, difficult positions to uphold. And he gives it a hell of a shot. Lively writer, too. The only way to erect such a common power as may be able to defend them from the invasion of foreigners and the injuries of one another, and thereby to secure them in such sort as that by their own industry and by the fruits of the earth they may nourish themselves and live contentedly, is to confer all their power and strength upon one man, or upon one assembly of men. So he's leaving open the two sides of the English Civil War right there, just for a second. Some maybe Parliament. That anyone reading this then would have heard that there. I'm not saying a Parliament can't be a sovereign. That's a very generous concession, I guess, from Royalist Tom. Or upon one assembly of men who may reduce all their wills by plurality of voices unto one will, which is as much to say, appoint one man or assembly of men to bear their person, and every one to own, and acknowledge himself to be the author of whatsoever he that so beareth his person shall act or cause to be acted, in those things which concern the common peace and safety, and therein to submit their wills, every one to his will, and their judgments to his judgment. This is more than consent, or concord. It is a real unity of them all. This is the first clear statement of social contract theory, I think. It is a real unity of them all in one and the same person, made by covenant of every man with every man, in such manner as if every man should say to every man, I authorize and give up my right of governing myself to this man, or to this assembly of men, on this condition, that thou give up thy rights to him, I'm adding ifs, and authorize all his actions in like manner. This done, the multitude so united in one person is called a commonwealth, in Latin civitas. This is a generation of that great Leviathan, or to speak more reverently, of that mortal God, to which we owe under the immortal God our peace and defense.
For by this authority given to him by every particular man in the commonwealth, he hath the use of so much power and strength conferred upon him, that by terror thereof he is enabled to form the wills of them all, to peace at home, to mutual aid against their enemies abroad, and in him consisteth the essence of the commonwealth, which to define it is one person, of whose acts a great multitude by mutual covenants with one another have made themselves every one the author, to the end he may use the strength and means of them all, as he shall think expedient for their peace and common defense. All right, so that's Hobbes's version of the social contract. Locke has a much more mellow version, which is I give up all my rights. Now, there's a few things I can't give up just because of the kind of creature I am. I can't actively give up my right to live. I'm just not going to do that. We're not that kind of people, all right? You can't force me not to resist if you come to murder me. But short of that, but actually if the sovereign comes to murder me, I should submit. I won't really submit, like it's because of the kind of person I am, but I ought to. Okay, so the act, this is a totalizing moment, is the social contract moment, where I am, the sovereign power runs through me, is me. If it punishes me, I am punishing myself. Hobbes says that over and over again. That makes me cry. If the sovereign power punishes me, I am punishing myself. Everyone who died in the killing fields, for example, executed themselves. For sure, really. Millions of people. All right, and we become one. But we become one through sheer subordination. Okay. Now, it is the mellow... so he says, for example, if he that attempteth to depose his sovereign be killed or punished by him for such attempt, he is the author of his own punishment, as being by the institution author of all the sovereign shall do. And because it is injustice for a man to do anything, for which he may be punished by his own authority, he is also upon that title unjust. Okay. Furthermore, as he says immediately, the sovereign cannot violate the covenant because he's not a party to the covenant. All right. So the sovereign authority runs through me and potentially turns me against myself, where I am doing contradictory things. I am both doing the crime and punishing myself for the crime. Like my subjectivity, my agency has been doubled, compromised, generalized. Now I'm sort of two people. I'm the sovereign and I am an individual distinct from the sovereign. But actually being an individual distinct from the sovereign is probably an illusion in some way. And this is also the first of like the giant collectivist visions, like the frontispiece of the Leviathan. All people making up the body of the king. Right? The giant body of the king, of which all people consist. Okay? So pretty soon we're fantasizing all kinds of collective agents. Classes, races, nations. Any minute now, nations start being giant collective agents here. And like that's very, very central to all the political philosophy that comes after. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Now, one amazing thing about this, and this has to happen in every version of social contract theory, you can only be put under a sovereign authority or constitute a sovereign authority that is legitimately operated over yourself by your voluntary agreement. But as in Locke later on, it doesn't matter whether you agree or not. Now you might think that's a contradiction, and you are right. But if these social contract theorists say, like, well, of course you can genuinely withdraw. Of course you didn't agree. If you didn't agree, then you're not subject to these laws, because that's the only way you can become subject to the sovereign power is by your agreement. Well, then we got a mess, because some people agreed, some people haven't, some people would, some people wouldn't. So it's going to turn out that you've agreed just by being around, all right, just by not dying, or just by not moving to a different sovereign power, all right. Because every subject is by this institution, like where are we? I should be telling you where I am. This is chapter 18 of the Rights of Sovereign by Institution. The other stuff I was reading is part 2, chapter 17 of Commonwealth. Part 2, chapter 17. And, these are the nut graphs of Hobbes' political philosophy. And this is 18, part 2, 18 of the Leviathan. Because every subject is by this institution author of all the actions and judgments of the sovereign instituted. I'm the author of that declaration of war, that Muslim ban, that, I don't know, man, like what the fuck, those drug laws. The drug laws, I am the author of the drug laws that put my brother in the state pen for 5 years. He's the author of those laws too. Where have we gone? How desperate are we to make an absolute totalitarian power? Real desperate. Like the arguments are getting insane. All right. Every subject is the author of all the actions and judgments of the sovereign. Every subject is the author of all the actions and judgments of the sovereign. I'd say, like, this is one of the instances in which Western political theory leans real heavily on grotesque fictions, and that's obvious, man. Like, right? I'm not the author of the laws, but this is the social contract moment that I want to return to, even in Kant, even in Locke. You are the author of the laws that subdue you, dude. You are the laws of the author you are the author of the laws in that statute book. Does it bother you that what you're saying is just false and has complete totalitarian implications? All right? Like that I am the law that represses me? I am the cop who beats me? I am the prison that holds me? Okay, so these are wider social contract positions, and they're grotesque in their fictionality, and in their, once again, they're evil. Right? Whatsoever the sovereign doth, it can be no injury to any of his subjects. If he executes you, conscripts you, and tosses you as cannon fodder into a mass grave, that doesn't harm you at all. Nor ought he to be by any of them accused of injustice. For he that doth anything by the authority of another doth therein no injury to him whose authority he acteth. But by this institution of a commonwealth, every particular man is author of all the sovereign doth, and consequently he that complaineth of injury from his sovereign complaineth of that whereof he himself is the author. It's like this, like the sovereign power is beating me to death, and as it does, it says, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself. to which I can only moan, expire. This is a social contract theory can move in a democratic direction. In Locke, not in Rousseau, but supposedly in Rousseau, but it has totalitarian implications, which is that the power runs through me, that my individuality is compromised into the state, that punishment or limitations on me are things I'm doing to myself, or they're things I've agreed to have done to me, like take my taxes, even though I'm also saying at the same time I haven't agreed at all, let's say. So social contract theory is the basic theory of liberalism. It originates in this absolutist monarchism, and it has many totalitarian implications in the sense of turning you into the agent of your own oppression in a completely fictional construction. Yes, I think Western political philosophy overall is extraordinarily poor. All right. I've talked about this in actually a tape, and I might do another one. But I just want to mention, and here we're in chapter 21 of part 2 of the Leviathan, of the liberty of subjects, where Hobbes gives the first super clear version. Again, he's a fucking genius, man, of philosophy. He gives the first super clear version of compatibilism, the idea that free will is compatible with determinism. And what all he does there is, and I guess I did this on the last tape, is to say that anything you do out of coercion, you do voluntarily. You could have said no and taken the consequences, like death. That's completely voluntary. On a compatibilist thing, where freedom is compatible with necessity, and your freedom is compatible with the necessity that we are imposing on you or hedging you around with, okay, or oppressing you in every dimension with. That doesn't compromise your liberty at all. Now, and compatibilism originates in political theory, right here, and it's a good first totalitarian move, and it's a consensus of Western philosophy on free will. All right. Okay. I guess, I've gone on long already. I might just mention that he holds that the sovereign is indivisible and must be singular by definition. And of course, and this follows from his whole setup, that the sovereign is not subject to law at all. Like, this is opposed to rule of law in that sense. And he argues that the sovereign can't be subject to the rule of law. Because all the stuff he does is much of it is contrary to the rule of law. It's is going to be incompatible with the laws that he himself imposes. And this is true by definition. And I want to point that out to you statists. You can't have a rule of law in the sense that the sovereign is subject to the same rules as the average citizen, or even in the sense that any policeman, is subject to the same rules as any given average citizen. Definitely not, man. So this rule of law thing is completely incoherent, and I would also attack the fuck out of that. Although in limited ways, like sort of rough consistency of rules over time or something like this, it can make sense. In terms of holding officials who are operating the monopoly of violence, war, incarceration, and all this stuff to the same laws, like against kidnapping, theft, murder, it's just not possible. Okay.
And it's just so dishonest, too. It's a bunch of bullshit. So, all right. And Hobbes, his totalitarianism should start to get you worried about social contract theory and classical liberalism, too. Maybe we'll do a little bit more on that line in the Rousseau thing. Is that coming next? I don't know.